Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of eGPLearning Podblast. I'm Dr. Andy Foster, GP partner in Nottingham with an interest in technology and working at scale.
And I'm Dr. Hussain Gandhi, also known as Dr. Gandalf on Twitter. Also GP partner in Nottingham, owner of eGPLearning and co-host with Andy for this Podblast, and hopefully you'll enjoy what we've got planned for you today.
Right, so Gandhi, what are we talking about today?
So we've got a slightly interesting topic that both Andy and I have been talking about for a while, where this is Andy's journey through genomics, I think is probably the best way of describing it. So his experiences, both positive and potentially not so positive, about how we can use genomics and whether it has application for primary care. And I think we're covering something else as well, aren't we?
So I think we're also reviewing the BNF app, but the main thrust is on our personal genomics special. I've used the 23andMe personal genetics testing kit and had some interesting experiences with that, which I'll share with you. Bear all.
Okay, so let's get cracking, shall we? But before we do, we just want to give a quick shout out to our regular listeners. So we've got Dr. Sonali Kinra, so at Sonali Kinra, regular listener for us, as well as the...
Yep, and at NCGPA Nottingham, NCGPA NOTTM, they're the Nottingham City General Practice Alliance, who I know the guys in the office listen to us.
Mm-hmm. And at NOTS LMC, so our local LMC, big supporters of the work that we do. They keep commenting and spreading our message, I think, which is nice. As well as all of our listeners out there on Facebook, Twitter, and even Instagram. Yes, we're on several platforms.
Let us know if you want a shout out. Give us some feedback and we'll give you a shout out in the episode.
As well as any topics you'd like us to cover, because we're always keen to hear feedback from our listeners and always willing to look at new ventures and new kind of topics that need to be discussed.
So Gandhi, have you been up to anything interesting in the last few weeks?
I've started fasting, which is probably the biggest one to me, and it's been an absolute nightmare this year. But that's something that comes around every year, and don't ask me how I manage it. More interestingly, I've started doing some other podcasting work, which is for Innovait. That's the journal that looks at managing GP trainees. So hopefully you'll all be able to hear that podcast coming out soon as the May edition. Interesting interviews with Professor Maya Lakhani, the president of the RCGP, and Dr. Zoe Norris, who's the sessional GPC sub-trainee, sessional committee lead. So really interesting interviews, really would recommend you listen to them, but obviously I've got a slight disclaimer that I've actually recorded it.
I've had a sneak preview. They're very good, very high profile guests, so that's a fantastic listen.
Sorry, just one more thing I want to say. I did want to thank all of our eGPLearning followers as well. Recently I've been doing a bit of a branding rework in terms of logos and that kind of stuff, and I'd like to thank all of my followers for their feedback. It's been really helpful and useful. And we've got some other stuff coming through about GDPR and Handy and all the other kind of things. Look at the website, feel free to have a look.
Yeah, great. And what have I been up to? Well, so last week I was on Notts TV, our local TV station, channel 7 or 8, I think, on Freeview. So I was on there promoting the GP Plus service, which is the local alliances service providing extended access to GPs 4 till 8 in the afternoons and 9 till 1 at the weekends, bookable through your own general practice here in Nottingham if you're registered here. So yeah, and a shout out to Notts TV. It was great working with you guys at Notts TV. On Twitter.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. It's a new service that's been up and running in the Nottingham area, and I know certain practices are seeing both positive and potentially some of the negatives of working with it, but it's a way of offering patients a different route for care for when their practice may either be full or if not able to provide the service that they want. So it looks like it's definitely something that's developing and quite useful.
Interesting rollout and developing as it rolls out. And actually, if you're a Nottingham GP and you want to provide some feedback, then go on the ncgpa.org.uk website and find the Contact Us button and give us some feedback about it. That'd be much appreciated. But without further ado, Gandhi, you've been looking at an app this week.
Yeah, so obviously we like to review apps for our listeners out there, either primary care focused or similar sorts of things that could be used in primary care. This week we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to look at a more clinical orientated app rather than some of our more patient friendly kind of ones we've covered in the past.
Yeah, no online CBT today, no CBT apps.
Yeah,
they seem to be the most common type.
Definitely. Well, we thought we'd cover probably one of the most useful apps that both me and Andy have come across when it comes for clinician use, and that's the BNF app itself. So for all of our listeners that don't know what it is, we kind of hope you do, but the British National Formulary is obviously the textbook of drugs that we all use to kind of figure out what we can prescribe and the risks, interactions and all that kind of stuff. And they've got their own app, which is cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I used this a while ago, but haven't used it for some time. I remember the main advantage being that it weighs about the weight of a smartphone and has the dimensions of a smartphone, so it's much more easy to put in your pocket and take on home visits. But what does this app do now, Gandhi? Is there anything new?
So they have updated the app compared to its older formats, and one of the benefits of that is a little bit less in terms of the amount of data that it stores for a start. It's also free for all NHS workers. So the easiest way to get access to it is use your nhs.net email account, which if you work in the NHS you should have, because obviously to work within it you kind of need one. And if you use that to register for it, first of all you get it for free. So that's a big thing. Secondly, it's not just the BNF app, it's also the BNF for Children's app as well. So it's got both elements of it. And the really good thing is it's so easy to switch between the two. It's literally a flick of a toggle. So tap, tap and done, and you swap between the two. But it's basically the compendium of drugs. Every drug that we would typically use in the UK is listed in this app for easy, quick reference. So rather than having to search through the 1,000-odd pages in the actual physical version, you can just type in the name and it will take you straight to the relevant pages and give you all the information that you need in terms of uses, side effects, doses, alternate names, for example. Really useful for those glaucoma drugs, which are a nightmare to figure out sometimes. And it's got a really cool interaction checker. So it will actually check if you are looking at prescribing two drugs and you don't have that system inbuilt in your clinical systems, or if you're out on a home visit and stuff and you want to think about what I need to prescribe, you can actually check quite quickly and effectively by just listing the name of the drugs, and it will tell you, is there an interaction, and if so, how significant that might be.
Yeah, right. Sounds really useful. And for me, the some of the big advantages are, I used to use the online version on the website, but I constantly used to have to sign in again and again. So presumably the phone handles all that, which is great.
Well, yeah, it's just sign into your phone and tap and you're off. The security is the phone security yourself, and there's no patient data or anything, so you don't have to worry about some of the other securities we've had with other apps in the past.
Yeah, and we often forget, but obviously apps update themselves in the background.
Yeah.
You don't have to make sure you've got the most recent version. Easy to forget that, but...
Which is actually really important. So I talk a lot about apps that people can use, and one of the ones I highlight is how good the BNF app is at this. So about a year or so ago, there was a problem with the physical BNF, because shortly after they published one of the episodes, they realised that they got the doses for erythromycin wrong. Now, erythromycin, for those that don't know, hopefully you do, is a drug that we prescribe fairly regularly, commonly used antibiotic, and the doses were wrong. So they had to basically send out an amendment to every single person they sent the physical version to. On the app, it's instant. It's already updated. And every time you sign in, it even tells you which version of the app you're using. So I've just tried it today. It's told me I'm using the May version 2018 of the app. So it is updated and regularly done so.
Fantastic. Right, I think I'm going to go away and download it again after this episode. So lots of good points. Any problems with the apps or any kind of issues that you found?
So when you first download it, make sure you do it over a Wi-Fi connection. Although it is a bit smaller than it used to be, it's still a big chunky file, so it does take up some space on your smartphone. Apart from that, not really. If I'm being honest, it is very good. I mean, it'd be nice if it had some sort of like voice recognition, so you could talk into it rather than having to type it, I guess, to some degree. But I think that's more of a superfluous plus rather than a negative, really. It does what it says on the tin, if I'm being honest. It's a great reference app that works really effectively, really simply. It's not complicated, and it's got the information that you need.
So I think I know the answer to this, but would you recommend this app to other GPs out there?
I would argue that every GP or primary care out there, particularly ones that are doing home visits. So if you're sitting in your clinic room, theoretically your electronic health system for your patient should have some elements of this built into it. But if you wanted, the resource, which is the BNF for us as clinicians, having it on your smartphone there and then to use is useful. Visits, it's a godsend. Not having to carry around the actual BNFs in your bag is an absolute plus.
Oh, sounds like this might be making your top 10 or even top 5 apps currently, Gandhi.
As I said, so I talk about apps that people use. This is one of my you must have apps. Simple as that, really.
Good. So big thumbs up for the BNF app. If you guys have got any suggestions of apps that you use or that you've heard of or things that you want us to take a look at, websites too, and let's not forget websites, then do let us know. Contact us on Twitter or any of the other myriad ways that you can contact us.
And I think one thing I'd like to mention on that, and so we've talked about clinical apps, and the BNF is probably the poster child for this. If you're looking for websites in particular that look at non-medication based uses, I really would recommend the Handy website. So some of you who are particularly RCGP members may have heard about this more recently. It's been publicised by the RCGP. It's created by the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, but it's a website that basically looks at non-medical treatment for a variety of health conditions and the evidence behind their use and stuff. Really useful stuff. It's spelled HANDI. Really recommend having a look at it.
Yeah, it's great. The guys in Australia do produce some good materials, don't they?
Yeah, I know, particularly that Royal Australian College.
Maybe we should talk to them, get some ideas. Cool. So just moving on to down to our special topic now. So I guess we might begin with some definitions for those not familiar with the topic. So Gandhi, what's personal genomics?
So personal genomics is, it's probably better to talk about genetics first, because I think that's probably the one that people have heard more about. So genetics is the inheritance of the genes and how they translocate and what they mean. So most people are probably aware of what genetics is and how it functions. And an example would be you have a condition that is inherited from father to son or from parent to child, direct line, either it's dominant, so if you've got the gene you will have the condition, or recessive, meaning that you may be a carrier and you need both of the genes, so both your parents kind of have to have it in order for you to have that condition. Genomics is more looking at the whole genome as in the complete picture, and not necessarily that it's about that just having the gene is enough, because the gene may have to be translocated, may have to be processed by your body, and actually it's not a spectrum of yes or no, that it's more some part of it, and that there's risk of you having those problems. And I think that's where genomics seems to set itself apart from genetics.
Yeah, and it seems to me that genomics lays the focus on kind of the individual person and how their genetics are expressed and how their whole genome contributes to what traits or illnesses they may have. And genetics seems to be more disease and gene focused. That seems to be the idea that I'm getting. So so interestingly for us, this is a wet technology. This is not a digital technology. It's biotech. But it is accessed through digital and online platforms.
So Andy, what do you mean by wet technology?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, so most of what we look at is dry. It's silicon-based. It's apps. It's data. It's bits, ones and zeros. Whereas this is A, T, C's and G's, and it's to do with our body tissues. It's biotechnology. Okay. Does that make sense, Gandhi?
Yeah, no, we've talked about this a few times, and I keep forgetting to ask you, so I thought it'd be a good time to do so, particularly for our listeners.
It's wet, not dry. So,
Cool. So, Andy, what did you do then?
So, for a while I've been fascinated by the adverts that you see on telly for ancestry DNA tests and 23andMe, have your genome analysed, learn about yourself, where you've come from, what diseases you might get. I've been quite fascinated by it for a while, and I thought, you know what, I'll take the plunge and I'll have my genome sequenced, see what the results come back, and see how I feel about that, because I know that personal genomics is something which people are beginning to talk about creeping into medical practice, into the NHS, and eventually into general practice as well. So I thought, I'm going to start looking into this topic. So I went away and I got my genome sequenced by 23andMe, an American company.
So what made you choose 23andMe?
Because they seem to have been the first. In fact, they were the first personal genomics company, and they have a good price point. They had I did this last year on Father's Day. They had a Father's Day discount. So a lot of the reasons were just plain old, marketing and awareness of their brand, to be quite honest. Just to tell you a little bit more about them. So they're a US startup company founded in 2006. As I say, they were the first direct-to-consumer personal genomics testing company. Interestingly, their CEO, somebody called Anne Wozcicki, something like that. She used to be married to Google's Sergey Brin, and Google was an early investor in them. So that's where they got a lot of their early stage funding from. And basically, you spit in the tube, they analyse your genetic material, and then they allow you to see an ancestry report. find genetic relations, people who might be related to you, those people who have indicated that they are happy to be found, I hasten to add.
Okay.
You can see a report about inherited traits, about carrier status, and also about your risks for serious genetic health conditions as well, things like Alzheimer's disease, macular degeneration, Parkinson's disease, which I think is very interesting.
So, Andy, anything we need to cover just before we go into this topic?
So I'm going to give a brief disclaimer here. So while I was doing this, something struck me. I thought if people get... So I'm not going to talk about my specific results here, because some people might have a favourable genetic profile. Some people might find that they've got what could be considered an unfavourable genetic profile. Just for things in terms of meeting a partner, getting married, having children. They might... find they have information that they might not want to share. So my results may be favourable, they may not be favourable, but I'm not going to talk about the specific results, because I feel that if I had favourable results and I were to talk about that, that might set a precedent, an expectation that people will talk about their genetic results. And I'm not sure that that's healthy for society, because those people who have unfavourable results will either be identified by the fact that they remain silent or feel compelled to lie or whatever. So I'm not going to talk about specific results.
And I guess we don't want everyone knowing your personal genetic data anyway.
No, not at all.
Good. So talk us through the process, Andy.
Right, so you order the kit. You can do this online. I think you can pick them up in Boots as well. Other pharmaceutical stores are in existence. They do an ancestry only kit, which is about £79, and you can have the full service for £149. You register, you get the kit, you register your account online, you spit in the tube provided, you post it back. Interestingly, when I did it, it went to Holland for processing. And I've just been on their website preparing for the podcast, and now they say all processing takes place in United States labs. And I was thinking, I wonder what that's about. Any thoughts there, Gandhi?
I wonder if it's that weird acronym that we've all been hearing lately. What was it? GDPR?
Yeah, I think they may find that they can't do as much with the data as they want, or extract as much value from the data as they want in the EU.
And for our listeners that aren't aware of this, have a listen to our last podcast. We talk about GDPR in significant depth. And please, if you don't know about GDPR, look it up.
Yeah, so data regulation is becoming much more strict in the EU, but not in the US. So anyway, you wait about 2 to 3 weeks. They process it using a technology called partial single nucleotide polymorphism analysis. So they look at...
I dare you to say that 10 times fast.
I'm not going to do that. It'll take too much time, Gandhi. But anyway, so basically it doesn't sequence your whole genome. It just looks at those parts that are known to vary in a significant way from individual to individual, and looks at those things. And they use a kind of system on a chip system, and that's something that's been developed. And it probably costs less than $100 to sequence somebody's genome now. It used to cost $1 billion when they first did the Human Genome Project. Really interesting. Anyway, eventually you get an email saying your results are ready, and then you log on, you look at results, and you can see a report about your ancestry, so where your genetics have come from around the world. You can find genetic relations, those people who have given permission to be found, I hasten to add, and you can see a report about your inherited traits, your carrier status for various diseases, and you can also be made aware of genetic risk factors for serious health conditions.
Okay, so if we go into each of those different areas, in a bit more detail. So tell us about the ancestry part. Yeah,
so Gandhi, so you're going to be very privileged here. We're going to bring it up on the screen and have a look. So the website is quite attractive, not too much information on the screen at once. We're in the ancestry bit here. There's a tutorial for each of the bits that just helps you interpret the information. They're short, fairly superficial, but they do the job. So here we go, just looking at my ancestry component. I'm not so concerned about sharing this sort of information, but you get a map of the world, and you get a sort of breakdown. So looking here, so British Irish 57.6%, French German 10%, Scandinavian 4.4%. So it really gives you a breakdown here. Anything interesting for us or me?
I think that one's quite interesting, Andy. Apparently you've got 0.1% North African and Arabian contingents in you.
Yeah, I know, which it's fascinating, isn't it? But that obviously there's a timeline. So it says between 6 and 8 plus generations ago, there was some North African and Arabian blood in my bloodline.
And even more interestingly, apparently Sardinian.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating, really. So I found it really interesting. The thing that really struck me before I did this, but also afterwards, is you're not learning information just about yourself. You're learning information about the people that you are related to. So there's the potential to learn things that you might not want to know. Unexpected things. For example, I might have found that my heritage was inconsistent with what I know to be the heritage of my parents who raised me, thereby discovering that I was adopted, or, you could just go all sorts of paternity-related issues.
Yeah, I guess that could be quite conflicting to see.
Yeah, so even something as innocent as ancestry testing, could have some unintended consequences. So I thought that was quite interesting. You can also track your Y chromosome through the generations, and that might have taken a different path to your mitochondrial DNA. So the Y chromosome indicates where your paternal line may have come from, and the mitochondrial DNA where your maternal line came from. That was quite an interesting exercise.
I guess that may be harder to do in women though, because obviously it'd be harder to differentiate which X chromosome was from which parents.
Oh yeah, that's true. I think they probably couldn't track the paternal line at all, I guess. And they just have to do the mitochondria. You get your mitochondria from the mother, so that's how they did the mitochondrial geographic or the maternal geographic tracing. So interesting.
Mm-hmm. So tell us. So the next section that's worth looking at is inherited traits. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is the bit which is probably the most fun and potentially harmless area, but it's quite interesting. So you get a breakdown of currently 22 traits, and it can sort of give you an idea of where you might head in life. So we can have a look at things like back hair. Am I likely to have back hair? So I'm comfortable to say I'm likely to have little upper back hair. Am I likely to develop a bald spot? No, not likely. Which is good.
That sounds so good.
So it's fun. But even this information, if you're thinking about potentially selecting partners to have children with, people, this could be a little bit controversial.
I mean, there's some interesting ones on there. So there's whether or not you can pick up asparagus odour is up there, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm likely to smell. Shall we click through on this and see what information's through there? So they did these nice breakdowns of what it means if you have that particular genetic variation. So for my sort of genotype in this respect, 61% of people would smell the odour of asparagus, and 39% cannot smell the odour. And it's one of those plots where you get 100 people, and we're used to seeing them representing risks, aren't we, and numbers needed to treat and so forth. It presents the information that way, which is nice.
And I think this is potentially a good way of trying to explain that whole thing we talked about, the difference between genetics and genomics. Genetics is you have the gene, whereas genomics is the risk or the probability that a gene has some effect. So what we've heard is that Andy has a higher proportion that he is likely to be able to smell asparagus smell in his own urine, or potentially somebody else's urine. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he can do it. It's just a higher chance that you could.
I'm happy to say I can.
No, yeah,
I definitely can. But it's not all positive. Likely at least a little unibrow. It says.
I wouldn't really agree with that one.
But some people like unibrows. So
fair enough.
So that was interesting.
So there's obviously this part about inherited trait, but there's another part I know that we talked a little bit more about, which was carrier status. So that's one of their sections. Tell us a bit more about that one.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So currently it gives you 43 carrier status results. And we'll talk about the genetic health risks later, but it makes you click through a tutorial before viewing those. But on this, you can view them without clicking through any screens or processing any additional information. But there's some fairly meaty stuff in here. So it will give you your information about your cystic fibrosis carrier status, for example, which I think is fairly significant. And certainly if you've got two partners who've done this type of test, that's the sort of thing you might be comparing notes on and might have implications for how you handle conception and having children potentially, and all sorts of things in here, some of which I'm not sure what they are. Gaucher disease type 1.
There's a few conditions on there that I have to admit even I've not heard of. So yeah, interesting. Is the thalassemias on there?
I think they are. Certainly sickle cell anemia carrier status. I think I saw them, but then again I might not have.
No, they don't seem to be.
Beta thalassemia is on there, and related hemoglobinopathies.
I guess why that's interesting. So, working in St Anne's have quite a high proportion of African population patients in terms of their origin. And I guess one of the things that often we get asked is about knowing their blood type, and what they actually mean is their thalassemia carrier status, because in African populations, it's a key thing. They will actually check their blood type and their blood group before they get married, because the worry or the risk of end up having children with thalassemia. effectively. So this may be a route via, because one of the challenges we have is that we're kind of saying, well, it's not really an NHS service, unfortunately.
So we could potentially be pointing people in this direction in the future.
To a provider, not necessarily 23andMe. But
no, to any provider, or maybe this will extend into an NHS service.
Possibly,
who knows? And the other thing which is, I think, the most controversial part is that it will. Yeah. So what are we looking at here?
So we're looking at specific health conditions that they're saying that you've got risk factors for. So on this list we've got, I guess, the ones that people always concern themselves about. So things like Parkinson's disease, BRCA genes for breast cancer, celiac disease, hemochromatosis, and Alzheimer's.
Definitely. So it's interesting. You say these are not on the screen because I have a risk. They're on the screen because they indicate that I may or may not have a risk of these things. But it's interesting, and they're quite. So this is quite potentially life-changing information.
Definitely,
I think people could make serious decisions based on these. BRCA1, for example.
Well, I mean, the risk with BRCA1 is the implications that has for you. So I guess one key case that many people probably remember was Angelina Jolie, who found out that she carried one of the BRCA genes, and as a result of that took the decision to have a mastectomy done. And obviously the implications of that is quite significant. And actually it was just a risk. It wasn't that she was going to get breast cancer, it was just a risk of it because she carried the gene.
Yeah, so Gandhi, if we were testing for these sorts of things and we were in the clinical genetics clinic, what sort of process would we go through before testing? Not that you've been there, but I'm sure you can anticipate.
I mean, standardly, when we have patients, we'd refer them off to the clinical genetics team. They'd have a distinct and long chat with the patient about what they're going to be doing, what they're going to be testing for, and the implications of it. It's very much counselled, very much, there's huge amounts of information given to people before they go down this route. I guess the question is, does that happen in this situation?
Yeah, so the results are not visible by default. You have to go through a process to unlock these genetic disease risk results. But let's just go through the process now on screen, because it's really short and it's arguable whether this is sufficient or not. So, 1, it talks about what a typical and variant genes are. 2, some variants may increase the risk of developing certain health conditions. It's very simplistic information. However, not everyone with a risk variant will develop these conditions. Okay. Some variants are more common in certain ethnicities. Well, fine. Warning is that we share our DNA with our family, so we will learn information potentially about other family members. That's quite a significant thing, I think. For certain conditions, genetics just part of the equation. Lifestyle factors are a factor too, environmental and lifestyle, in whether those genes are expressed. And so that's it. Our tests are not diagnosis. So our tests do not diagnose any health conditions. Talk to your healthcare provider to better understand how to manage your risks. So GPs, look out for people coming your way in the future. And then you can click through to some more information, but that's basically all you need to unlock these results.
Okay, so 8 clicks of the mouse and you've got to this information, which in that information it says that they kind of take no responsibility for the information it is. There's no detailed discussion or information about what that has an implication for. And I guess the flip side, as per most of these healthcare services, it says go talk to your GP, who, with all due respect, will probably say, so you've got an increased risk. What are we going to do about that? Well, probably not much, to be fair.
Exactly. It's interesting. Yeah, they're pointing in the direction of the risk sponge of the world, the general practitioner.
Yeah.
There is more information on each one, though. If you click through, it does give you information about the genetic tests that has been applied. You can click through to some more detailed scientific information about that. It also lets you know how various lifestyle factors might influence your risk of expressing the gene and developing the condition. So there is some actionable information there at least, and then it links through to some trusted sources about that disease that there's a risk factor for. So there's some responsibility there, but it strikes me it's very easy to get this information, much more easy than has always been the case, certainly in the UK.
And I think the key thing here is that information sharing aspect that you mentioned, that that you can find out information about your family members who may not really be keen on you knowing about that. There is this. It's difficult. Again, we are talking about risk. We're not talking about certainties, and that sometimes sometimes a hard thing for people to understand the difference between, particularly when you're presenting such a simple and easy to use format.
Yeah.
The complexity is not always evident.
Yeah, so for example, my parents are in their 60s. If I learned that I have a risk of developing late onset Alzheimer's disease, that may have some implications for my parents. And would I tell them? Would I not tell them? Lots of dilemmas that might arise for people that they don't necessarily expect.
And then this leads on to the privacy of the whole aspect of this thing. So tell us a bit more about that, Andy.
So after doing all of this testing and signing up, I then, in preparation for the podcast, had a much better look at the privacy information on the website. So they talk a lot about privacy. It's prominent on their website, and they talk about how they aim to give you choice and control in terms of how your information is used. However, there were some potentially worrying things in there, actually. So they do say that they keep the genetic information and the personal information separate.
Okay.
But they are linked with, they do have a cipher, there is a way of linking them, ultimately, of how do they give me my information, if not. And obviously that increases the level of security, but that cipher will be somewhere. I think there's still potential for data breaches, and organisations potentially more secure than 23andMe have had data breaches, governments, so forth. So I think there's a risk of leakage of information.
I think unfortunately we live in the era where leakage is always a factor, though, isn't it? So as much as we talk about NHS patient safety and all that kind of stuff, that's obviously one of the concerns many of us have in terms of the digitalisation of healthcare, that how safe is your data, because technically if someone really, really wanted to and they knew what they were doing, they could always breach it, because everything is breachable, technically speaking.
Yeah, it's true. And they could always steal my genetic information by stealing some body tissues, of course, as well. But they'd have to physically be with me or in my house.
I'm sure your genetic data is exceptionally valuable there, Andy.
Yeah, everyone's after it. So, the other thing which was interesting is it says, under certain circumstances, they may release my genetic information to law enforcement, which I thought was interesting.
So does that mean that you're now America's Most Wanted?
Well, I don't know, but I could go there, couldn't I? And, maybe I'm a close genetic match to somebody who's committed a significant crime. I don't know. Don't know where this is going. And, of course, it's there forever, in theory. I think, actually, you can ask them to delete it. But, in theory, if I don't do that, it's there forever. So I have that risk.
Well, under GDPR you could, but obviously they're American based, so you may not have the same rights. Because
they moved the processing from Holland to the United States, of course. Although mine was processed in Holland, I don't know. Anyway, and also they do say, so you wonder, well, insurance companies, they'd love this information so that they can risk stratify people more effectively and give me cheaper or more expensive life insurance, depending on outcome. And they say, this is not the case in the UK. There is a moratorium on the sharing of genetics information with insurance companies, and this has been in place for quite some time, a few decades, I think, but it runs out in 2019. So I'm secure from that risk as well until next year. I think there's an expectation that they'll put another moratorium in place, but that's an interesting risk. It's next year.
Not long.
So there we go.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about genetics. Genomics. Any other kind of projects that we're aware of, Andy? Yeah,
so I guess the thing to think about here is, so what's coming up, what's potentially next for this personal genomics. So there is the 1,000 Genomes project ongoing in the NHS, which is something really interesting. They've probably got a Twitter account, which we'll give a shout out to. So people with established diagnoses of genetic disorders within the NHS are having their genomes sequenced in the hope of gaining greater understanding of those conditions, and that data, it is hoped, will potentially lead to new treatments and developments for those disorders. So that's a really excellent idea and excellent project, I think.
Yeah, I think there's tons of research into the genomic structure and what that means for patient implications. I mean, one of the key areas that I've covered, we've talked about this a few times, but one of the key areas where I think that this has the most use is, how do you process particular things? So, for example, if I wanted to give a patient sertraline, the standard antidepressant medication, I know that majority of patients will probably tolerate it well, but some will get some pretty nasty side effects sometimes. So sickliness, sweating, or it may not actually work. And how many times has your doctor given you a medication where they've outlined some of the side effects and the risk, and it's not done what they kind of said it would do. Well, that's not because the drug hasn't necessarily worked. It may be because you don't actually have the genetic information to process that medication properly, and therefore it's not worked because you can't process it.
Yeah, your receptors may be slightly different shape, so they're not binding with the necessary receptors and so forth. I think codeine's another one. I think some people get awful nausea with codeine, and I think it's felt to be linked to a genetic to a gene.
Yeah.
So we're talking about personalised medication, aren't we? Personalised medication regimes.
Personalised medicine, which is potentially where a lot of the healthcare is driving towards, as we want to, consumer-led healthcare system. This personalisation of how we both access, but also how we use our healthcare providers and stuff. So I think there is some positivity, because the other way of looking at it is antibiotics. Some people can't manage antibiotics effectively. They don't work necessarily the same way on their supporting their immune system, or in terms of treating infections. And actually, could genomics help minimise those kind of issues and mean that we can actually treat people more effectively first time round?
Absolutely. So there's lots of potential. I think this is an area with potential. Whilst I've had a kind of mixed experience here myself. Other things that may be interesting applications is this whole kind of, you hit on it with your population at your practice, Gandhi, in the pre-relationship, pre-conception testing, matching of people, that may become an important thing.
I guess unfortunately that's both a positive. If you're trying to watch out for those more, debilitating health conditions and inherited conditions, but also a negative. I mean, could we end up being in a situation where people are not wanting to continue their relationship because of the risk of genetic disorders?
Yeah.
Again, emphasis on risk, not actualities.
Yeah, absolutely. And could people even want to genetic profile you before employing you? I mean, we're getting into scientific dystopia territory here, but not just insurance, but employment. Access to other things in society, educational institutions, potentially a slippery slope. Good film to watch, Gattaca, Gataca, which takes place in a sort of mild dystopian future. Is it mild? I don't know, but a dystopian future where this sort of genetic testing is commonplace. Really interesting film.
Yeah, it's a great film. Definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
I also love the part where I've forgotten the main character's name, but he does something with contact lenses where he just flings them out with quick, swift movements. Awesome.
I wish I could get my contact lenses out like that. No, that doesn't happen. So interesting in the future. And of course, as the technology continues to evolve, there are techniques that now exist to edit genes and change genes, and who knows if those sorts of technologies may become available in the future. Who knows?
Well, I think that's probably a little bit further into the future than we're happy to talk about. I guess one of the key things is, though, the elements of using this to tailor your healthcare, medications, all that kind of stuff. That is potentially, well, it's doable now. It's not consumer level, and it's definitely not NHS level access at this point. Maybe next 5 years, even. And we're not talking a long time away.
Yeah, I think it's close. It's close.
Mm-hmm. So, what does this mean for general practice then, Andy?
Well, I think in the short term, there might be more people coming to us worried about the results that they've had from online genetic tests, and we'll have to deal with that. Mm. But it may be a spur for some people to make necessary and helpful lifestyle changes, potentially to reduce those risks within themselves. Any ideas, Gandhi?
I think it's got applications. We've talked about the medicine side, which I guess is the part that speaks to me the most in terms of being able to manage and treat our patients. But again, I don't think that's now. I think that's in the future. Clearly, people, the worried well is my biggest concern with this. People armed with information about risk that doesn't necessarily translate into actual outcomes and stuff, and the fear and the worry. We're unfortunately developing our healthcare system into a health anxiety state. And we've talked about this in our previous podcast about our views on this, and I do worry to a degree how much impact this is going to have on the general, the overdiagnosis issues, the health anxiety issues. Cyberchondria is a big one as well, and this kind of plays into that a little bit.
Geneticochondria.
Even more complicated. But, I think it has some uses potentially. I'd love to know what kind of sleeper I am, for example. I know there's a way of looking this up, and is that information that I can use then to improve my sleep, maybe?
Potentially.
Yeah. So would you recommend it, Andy?
So it's been a really interesting process, and it's been interesting. So I sort of want to recommend it. The ancestry and traits element were particularly interesting. For those people who are absolutely sure that they can take a responsibility for themselves and can really handle that information, those elements, the ancestry and the traits bit, might be of interest. But I don't really think I could actually sit here and recommend any of it, for the simple reason, just the risk of unexpected information that you're not prepared for. Do you learn that you've got a genetic risk for something that you weren't expecting? That might have implications for your family. Do you learn something unexpected about your ancestry that you weren't expecting that has implications for you, your family? Also, you learn about these risks, but actually there's not a great deal of interventions. So the interventions that it suggests for most of them are stop smoking, eat a healthy diet, and be physically active, which is common sense anyway. There's not any other way to really affect your risk for a lot of these things. So there's a lack of intervention that you could do, and of course the privacy concerns. So a little bit worried. I'll be looking over my shoulder when I go through US Customs the next time I'm in the States, and what's my car insurance going to be like in 2019 if I have who knows,
AMD.
Yeah, AMD, increased risk of retinitis pigmentosa, who knows. So I've got concerns. I don't recommend it at this stage. I think the technology's got a lot of potential, but I can't sit here as a GP and recommend it. Gandhi, would you do it, having had this conversation?
So it's always been on my mind, and me and Andy have talked about this a few times, but I've got to admit, no, simply put, I'm there with you on the security and the privacy concerns in terms of people having my genetic information. I'm sure that the conspiracy theorists will probably say that all the governments have our genetic information anyway, and we've already got bio passports and that kind of stuff and the things. But you know what? No, simply put, I don't want to know to that depth. It'd be nice, I guess, to know some of the aspects, but yeah, I'm just too hesitant right now, so you can't really see me spitting into one of these tubes anytime soon, I'm afraid. Right. Unless I'm made to anyway.
Right, so there we have it. I hope that's been an interesting discussion. I've certainly enjoyed preparing for it and having this discussion today. Let us know what you think. So respond to us on Twitter, either directly. I'm at DRAW Foster, Dr. A.W. Foster on Twitter.
I'm Dr. Gandalf52 on Twitter as well, and we're both around on Facebook and a variety of other mediums, as well as contactable through the website that we each run. So mine's eGPLearning.co.uk and
www.avoidingpuddles.com. Nearly said signposting health there.
No. And, feel free to spread the word as well. We're keen to hear from people that have actually tried this themselves. So we've heard Andy's, journey through the whole world of genomics and stuff. If you've had a similar journey, if you've tried it, why didn't you? And you feel comfortable sharing that information as well, please remember that. Then feel free to contact us and let us know how you got on with it, and we'll see whether or not you agree with our, experience of it, really. Yeah, fantastic. So do listen to us, subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, do provide feedback, do please leave us a review if you can on your podcasting platform of choice. Thanks for listening. Speak to you guys soon. Bye. Bye.